NAHMS for 27 years. Now to the topic at hand, dealing with survey refusals. I titled it that. I think really in the book it says interviewing techniques, and it really sort of all folds together. But what I sort of want to address with you today is to give you an idea of some of the things that we would suggest to how you view this. And people might say, well, you know, gee whiz, these are voluntary surveys. Why shouldn't we just let farmers refuse and let it go? Well, you know, there are really several reasons. And I just want to go over a few of those. Any of you that have had statistics courses, you realize the way that we select samples, we select samples so that people are selected represent others, either in the state, the county, the U.S., size grouping, economic category. However we stratify that sample, the ones that we've selected need to represent those. Now, that being said, we realize that everyone's not going to respond. A lot of our surveys, what we'll try to do is, and I think even tried to do this, John has some on the NAHMS, when we start getting responses into the office, we try to determine what type of respondents are responding and what types are refusing, so that when we get to the end of the survey effort, we can sort of describe where we think we may have some unintended bias built in. So you really just can't say, well, gee whiz, all of my large cattle producers, they didn't want to participate on this survey. That's okay. They've had a rough year. You've got to have them represented. What does that mean? It means also that we have more accurate data. You just can't assume that because you just let people sort of off very easily that you're going to have a representative sample and you're going to have good data. Also, too, something we're going to talk a little about is education. You're not just going out there for your health. You know, this isn't a job that everybody really wants, is going out there contacting people for survey information or to do testing. But obviously it's important information or we wouldn't be doing this to begin with. So education is going to be key. Also, it allows the agencies to fulfill their mission. We all have a mission. I talked about performance measures. More and more every time that we go through an annual cycle or a fiscal year cycle, we have to give good proof about how we're fulfilling our mission. Are we having success? And then the last one, OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. We've had a lot of dealings with them on a lot of things. Nora, I was just visiting our friends last week on some NAHMS surveys. They're very tough on us. There's an OMB rule now that any survey that has less than an 80% response rate, the agency has to have a plan in place to address the bias introduced by the non-respondents. Now, someone might say, that doesn't sound too difficult. Let me tell you, it's very difficult. Surveys, you know, most of our surveys are voluntary. The census is mandatory. Everything else we do is voluntary. The surveys you're doing are voluntary. We really struggle with trying to get an 80% response rate on a lot of surveys these days. Agriculture's in pretty good shape. Farmers, for the most part, are a pretty good lot. They're good people, and they often understand the importance of these types of things. You try to do a survey from Commerce or from some other agency with the general public in the U.S. and make it voluntary and see what kind of response you get. I've been to conferences where they talk about 30% response rates, 40% response rates, and my eyes just pop out of my head. It'd be very easy to say, gee whiz, you know, just let them go. But we don't do that very easily. I'm going to get into a little bit about, you know, why not let them go and some techniques to use. Next slide, please. I guess I could try this. Okay, what do we know about uncooperative respondents? We do know it takes a little love because, as I said, from my years of experience in making personal contact, everyone's different. You just can't use the same recipe every time that you walk out there. One thing that's very difficult to do, and as a director of NAHMS, I've done this. A lot of times I know when I would know when I was going out to visit refusals because the staff in my office had given me a list of names and saying, these people are being a pain, you need to go see them. So they would give me a list, and I would go out and try to convert them or talk to them. So I was already having to go out with a different mindset. You know, I knew it's very easy to sort of not be positive about something or be a little bit down about it if you're anticipating a situation or you're anticipating a response. In most of your cases, what I'm imagining is NAHMS gotten the consent for you to go back out or make a contact, so you're thinking, oh boy, they're good to go in most cases. And you're hopeful that they are. We know that it doesn't always work out that way. We know that there's situations where they may have told us, yes, please feel free, go ahead and give consent. And maybe they were having a good day when we saw them, and maybe when you go out, they're having a bad day. Well, everybody has good days and bad days. That does shift a lot. So you've sort of got to go out with a mindset, that you're ready for the situation and prepare yourself. What that means is you've got to really mentally, prepare to walk out there and meet someone or address them on the phone and be ready for any concerns they're going to have or be ready for anything they're going to lob at you. So let's go to the next slide. We all have perceptions, but what we found out over the years is we've done some studies, and one study was basically that asking questions is good. People that initially you thought were going to refuse you, if you engage yourself in conversation with them and start asking questions that may or may not be related to what you're looking for, and sit there and just talk to them and listen to them for a while, you'll eventually get some information. When I was a young statistician a couple of years ago in Pennsylvania, one of my first assignments, I remember the first refusal I encountered was a poultry farmer in southern Pennsylvania, broilers, and I remember it was about 10 degrees. I was standing outside the chicken house, and this guy was yelling at me. And all I remember was I was so cold, all I wanted to do was get back in the car and go home. But I stood there for a while and just let the guy vent, and we talked just about other things, and eventually he gave me 3 out of the 4 numbers I wanted. I had to sort of write discreetly and remember some things in my head, so when I got back to the car I could write it down, but he gave me the information. Not sure he realized that, but we had a good conversation. 80% of the people that say I'm too busy eventually end up cooperating. One thing that we tell our NAHMS enumerators is make it convenient for the respondent. As far as I'm concerned, it's all about their convenience. I mean, I know we all have busy lives, but you're the one asking for information. So you can't go out there demanding, saying, I either got to get it today or that's it. You've got to make it convenient for them. And if you guys go out to make a contact or do some testing and it's not a good time, you probably need to recognize that and recognize that you might need to come back another day. Something could have happened. Something could have come up with a kid. Something could have come up that they're just in a really bad mood that day. Now, 52% who initially make negative comments end up participating, meaning basically they start out by saying, I don't trust anyone in the government. Why are you guys doing this? This is of no value to anyone. Maybe it's leading up to the election next fall, and they got some really strong political views, and they think you're from the government, and they want to rant and rave about that. Who knows? But a lot of times, about half of those folks do end up cooperating if we make it convenient for them. Respondent concerns. One thing you really need to remember is reluctance is not personal. When I was much younger, the first thing I had to learn was how not to take attacks on the government or someone's opinion about something, how to not take it personally. When you're standing out there and someone's either yelling at you, and I'm not saying, hopefully you guys don't get yelled at by the stage you're at, but if someone's yelling at you, they're upset about something, it's very easy to take that personally, particularly if maybe you're not having the best day. And the thing that I've always told our NAHMS enumerators, and the thing that we remember sort of, I guess you'd say, as government servants is, you really do have to stand there and take it. You really can't start yelling back at the person. Now, do you have to stand there and take abuse? No. You can certainly walk away and leave if the person's abusive. I'm not telling people to do that. But you can't exactly go back and say, look, you so-and-so, let me tell you what I really think about you. Can't happen. And reluctance isn't necessarily bad. Maybe they just need to have some questions answered, or maybe they just have some concerns that no one's taken the time to address. I have found out before that sometimes the frustration of respondents is that they ask for some assistance from a government agency, or they called a government office, and either they didn't get the information, or they got passed around 10 times to a different number and never got a live human being, and they were just really upset about that. And what I would do is I would take down the information they were looking for, no matter who it was for, and go back to my office and make a phone call to the contact in that agency and say, could you please get an answer back to this person? Or if I could find out the answer, I'd call them back. But I would always follow back up with them to make sure that they got the answer. A value judgment, like I said, it's almost like not being personal. They're not necessarily trying to, say you're a bad person or what you're doing is bad. They may think what you're doing is bad, but that's another point. But it's not necessarily a value judgment on you. And it isn't always a refusal. Just remember that. Just because they're a little reluctant. It's probably going to be very rare that you knock on anyone's door or call them on the phone anymore, and they're going to say, come on in, whatever you need. There's going to be some reluctance there. It is individual and unique. Every situation, every person's different. And it could be a request for information, as I said earlier. They could be testing your credibility. Are you who you say you are? Do you really know about beef cows? Are you really a vet? They may have some questions like that, and you may have to talk to them a while to convince them that you know what you're doing. Unfortunately, there are a lot of scam artists out there today that show up at people's places, and they just don't know. It's an opportunity to identify their concerns, maybe to help them out. It really does say a lot when they have a concern because of another agency or because of another problem, maybe in the county or wherever you're at. And you just can't imagine the credibility it gives you or NAHMS and APHIS if you're able to help them out, even if it takes 5 minutes of your time just to get an answer for them. It is a challenge. We won't disagree with that. It would be very nice to go out there and everyone's just sitting there waiting with their pen and pencil in hand and saying, come on to my farm and do whatever you need to, but we know that's not going to happen. You've got to be prepared. How many of you have been in this situation? How many of you get phone calls at night? People wanting to do surveys or people wanting to sell something. How many of you people talk to them? I don't see any hands. Okay. Has anyone ever done a survey on the phone? You have? Okay. I did one time it was from when I lived in Phoenix, and it was, I guess, a test market for a TV show, so I thought it was sort of cool. So I actually did the survey and watched the TV show, but that's not the kind you normally get. Well, and I will just mention, we've talked a little bit about within our working group here, a little bit about incentives. How many of you have heard of the Agricultural Resource Management Survey that NAHMS does with the Economic Research Service? It's a huge economic study. It's like about a 40-page questionnaire. We go out to about 30,000 farmers a year. It's what goes into, it basically establishes estimates of net farm income for the U.S., for the ag sector. Gathers a lot of information, cropping practices on specific crops. It's a very intensive survey. Interview times average from 30 minutes to 2 days, depending on the size of the operation. It's extremely intensive. So we realized, when our response rates kept dropping off and off and off and off, that we had to try some things. When NAHMS has a research division, we have researched how to increase response rates over the years, and just have really, sort of kept hitting a wall about what to do. OMB, who actually approves us doing our surveys, has never really been real keen on us handing out money. But we finally did convince them to allow us to try debit cards. And so what we've started doing is, on the ARM survey, we actually do provide, for a portion of the sample, we do provide a $20 debit card. And we've done it through a variety of ways, trying to test how it's most effective and how we best spend our money to utilize that. But we have shown that it is increasing our response rates about 3 to 5%. What's amazing is the number of farmers or farmers' wives that don't cash it, but will still cooperate. And we've even had letters into our administrator that says, thank you very much for the offer, but I really don't feel like I should take this money for doing the survey. Now, and my question was, well, for the general population in the U.S., how often would that happen? How often would it not be cashed? So, I thought that was very interesting. But we've been having some discussions about, are there some things that we could do for the NAHMS studies? So stay tuned. I mean, we've thought about some of those things as well, and as we continue to sort of struggle with how to increase response rates, we're going to look at those issues. Okay, dealing with refusals. When you told the other person on the end no, how did you feel? Great? Was it for a sales call or was it a survey? Sales call. And I guess I should clarify, those are probably a little bit different. I sort of hang up on those too. Could you sense any incentive for you participating, except for example here? I mean, were you given a good reason for why you needed to complete the survey or respond? And how did the interviewer respond when you said no? Or did you just simply hang up and not wait for the answer? I mean, those are real things, and they're challenges that even we face in contacting farmers. One thing that we tried in Maryland, when we were making our phone calls from the Maryland Department of Agriculture, that's where we were housed, on the caller ID, they didn't have it set up so that it would show Maryland Department of Agriculture. It said unknown caller. So we were getting a lot of hang-ups from that. Now, when we got it switched over that it said Maryland Department of Agriculture, we had other people that hung up because they were upset with the Maryland Department of Agriculture. So what we had to do, what we started doing, was farming some of that out to our field people, some of the enumerators for NASDA, where they would be calling from their home phone, and the farmers in their area knew the enumerator and saw their name come up, and they would respond. So you've got to use different techniques, and you've got to be careful. Just real briefly, what I wanted to talk about, go through, and I'm taking a lot of time here, but dealing with refusals: education, listening, responding, and positive impression. And dealing with refusals, education. As I said earlier, the best way to gain cooperation is to be educated about what you're doing. Before you go out there, you really need to sort of have a script, or before you call them, you really sort of need to have a script about what you're going to say, why it's important, and what's in it for them. Now, with a lot of this stuff, it's sometimes difficult to say what's in it for them. I do know that with the work that you do when you go out, it does provide them some free testing services that they would have to pay their vet for otherwise. So that is a selling point. So you need to think of those things before you call. So when they come back and say, I really don't see why I need to respond, why should I take the time? And you can also have reasons lined up as to what this program does for the beef industry. Dealing with refusals, educational, a lot of things that are in your manual, a lot of things that we do at NAHMS, pre-survey materials such as letters to respondents explaining the importance of participating in this. General information handouts. I know in the packets that the NAHMS enumerator leaves with all the respondents when they go out there, there's a lot of information about the testing programs, a colored brochure about the importance of it. Press releases. A lot of times we'll do press releases in local newspapers. I'm not sure, Nora, George, if you guys do any of that at all. Maybe on the national scale in the magazines. But we do a lot of press releases that go into farm newspapers locally so they know we're coming out. Sharing your knowledge on the project, just being prepared. And something we're going to talk about a little bit more is prepared responses to reasons for refusing. Listening, effective listening skills. When a respondent is upset and starts sort of going off on you, instead of walking away, try to listen to them. Try to key in and listen to what their concerns are. Even if you're not able to address them immediately, at least make some notes and bring it back for your next training so you can talk about it and come up with some ideas. Or maybe it means giving your coordinator a call so that you can have something addressed fairly immediately. It may be something critical that you've run into. Just a few things about listening that you need to remember. Focus on the respondent. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and you're trying to look at them and have a conversation and they're either looking off to the left or the right or they're looking above your head and they're not even focused on what you're trying to say? It happens all the time. We all do it because we get busy and we have our mind elsewhere. Listen to the entire message. Don't cut them off. Don't cut them off and say, well, I can see right now you're not going to participate, so I've got to go on to my next visit. See ya. Hear what they have to say before responding. Try to answer their questions. Address their concerns with specific answers. Try to answer their questions. And paraphrase what you think they said. Sometimes I've come away from conversations when I've been preoccupied and I get back to my office and I go, you know, I don't know that I could remember what George said over there, but maybe I need to call him back up and find out. It helps when you're having a conversation with someone face to face if you look back at them and say, so what I hear you saying is that you contacted your local FSA office with a problem and no one called you back. Could you repeat the problem to me so I'm sure that I understand? So it always helps to paraphrase, to make sure you're clear. There's no misunderstanding. And observe nonverbal cues. They raise their fist or, just joking. All kinds of things happen. You can look at people's expression sometimes and you can tell where they're coming from. I can look at people and tell whether they really are interested or not. They may be looking off into space. I can look at someone and see that they're gritting their teeth and they're about to start yelling at me. You can really tell things by paying attention to people. This was some more information from a British panel survey. It said refusals are typically converted at a rate of 30 to 40% per year, meaning for samples that come in a given year, typically 30 to 40% of those can be converted if treated effectively. Refusals that are more easily converted may be reasons related to stressful family situations. Family situations change. Looking after an elderly or ill person or children are too busy. Everyone's busy. They're not always as busy as they are in other times. This is part of sort of being aware when's the best time to contact them, or maybe you need to come back a better time. And then reasons that are not as easily converted, maybe they have confidentiality concerns. These are really tough sometimes. But that's why it's important to sort of remind them of, they know that NAHMS made the initial contact. They know that their data and their name and address is protected by Title VII of the U.S. Code. Thinking back to the early days, I can sort of see where it would have been easy to convince people of this. I remember riding around with enumerators in the field back in the early 80s, and they'd have printouts of people thrown in the back seat of the car. They'd have questionnaires thrown around the car. People were just not as aware of keeping personal information concealed. And I think with everything that's been going on, we're all very aware of the importance of that. We need to relay to the respondents that we're very concerned about that too. That just as we would be concerned about our personal information. How many of you have gotten a letter from a credit card company saying we've changed your card number and your number because it's a chance that your number has been lifted? Or I got one 2 weeks ago. It happens all the time. And a lot of times respondents will say nothing has changed. I don't believe that, first of all. Everything changes. That's sort of a cop-out, I think, sometimes in terms of responding. So really, for that response, when you say, could I just ask you the questions again, just so I could refresh your memory, and maybe we could just verify that. And then dealing with refusals, be positive and helpful. Truly, the best thing you can do is be positive throughout. If someone's yelling at you about something, it's sort of difficult to walk away smiling, but you need to try. You need to try to come out of that with a positive experience. There's always good to be found out of something, but they can tell if you're being negative yourself. And it's one thing to agree with someone if they have a complaint, but you don't want to sort of let yourself go down with them. And what I'd like to do is sort of think about some potential responses for these. First one was too busy. Okay? Another one was too long. The questionnaire is too long. Then the next one was, I just did a survey. Let's take those three first and just talk about them for a minute. What could be some potential responses for I'm too busy? When should I call back? Anything else? Remember what I said, you really need to make it convenient for the respondents. I think your data collection window it's fairly long, so that if you start early enough, what we tell our enumerators on longer surveys like the ARM study is to make contact early so that you can plan to schedule an interview in when it's convenient for them. And so you really need to be cognizant of that and make sure that you make it convenient for them. Unfortunately, the farmer may say, Sunday morning at 8 o'clock is the only time I have available. If you really want to get that interview, that may be when you have to do it. So, sometimes, you do. And the thing is, too, if you really go out of your way, they're thinking when they tell you that you're going to say, oh, well, I can't do it then, I couldn't possibly do it then, we'll just have to forget it. That's what they're thinking that you're going to do and that they're going to get out of it. But when you come back and say, I'll see you at 8 o'clock Sunday morning, bright and early. They're going to be like, you know. And then they're sort of tied into it unless they want to come up with another excuse. That does work, believe it or not. How about too long? I mean, we obviously, on a lot of the studies we do that are upwards to 40 pages or more long, some of these economic studies, you can imagine some of the responses we get on that, particularly when they've got to pull out a lot of records and stuff. But you've really got to be prepared with understanding what the content is of the questionnaire and why it's critically important to what you're doing. I mean, there's obviously, you can even go back to the point that the number of months that have been spent before the design of this instrument have been spent vetting information with stakeholders, universities, organizations, getting feedback as to what is critically important for the beef industry, and tell them that this wasn't just a passing thought that we just took last time's questionnaire or we just threw all these pages together and thought they'd be interesting questions. There was a reason that everything is there, and Nora and George and Bruce know that we're pretty tough on adding questions to questionnaires because we want to be sure that there's a reason and a purpose for doing it. And I'm sure on the vet portion you guys are the same way. You don't want to go out there with frivolous questions and waste their time. You've got to have a reason for asking them. So we don't just put them there just for the heck of it. I mean, we do try to be as efficient as possible, but we do really evaluate. And I spoke prior about the Office of Management and Budget. They are very, very, very tough on us. George and Nora know this in terms of justifying why we need to collect a certain amount of information. And they have people that evaluate these things continuously, and they will call us up, and we'll have to go in and defend why we're doing certain things. So we don't put stuff on those questionnaires just for the heck of it or because we just think it's interesting. You might want to know one day. There should be a critical need that's expressed. How about I just did a survey, or I've given that same information to somebody else recently? Probably don't get that as much on yours, except they just know they've done a survey and they may not always remember what questions they answered or who did it. How would you respond to that? First thing I would ask is, do you remember who you did the survey with or for? Do you remember what the purpose of it was? Because we haven't. This is the first time we've been out, and this is a brand new survey effort. It more than likely wasn't associated with this particular project. But try to, if they can give you some more specifics on what they felt they were asked or who might have done it, you can do some follow-up and investigate. And a lot of times too, people's perception is they just did something yesterday. When you take the time to fill out a lengthy questionnaire, it's always going to seem like you just did it yesterday. It could have been like last year or 2 years ago. A lot of times what we'll do is when we have perpetual refusals in a field office and the response comes back in from the enumerator, they said, oh, they were in the sample last year. They just did this. They don't want to do this economic survey again. And we'll check back, and it was 3 or 4 years ago. It just seems to them like it was last year. Because we do try to control the sampling on a lot of the NAHMS surveys so they're not selected as often. Let me pick just a couple of more because I think these are very important. How about they're mad at another government agency? What could you offer? What could you do? They say, oh, gee whiz, I went down to FSA to sign up for such and such a program, and they told me that I wasn't eligible, and I think that's, not right. So I'm not going to talk to anybody from a government agency. I mean, I think one thing that, you can do, and I'm not telling you to get into other government agencies' business, but I think you can listen to what their complaint is, and I think you can pass it along through the NAHMS group so that they can at least, pass along to FSA and whomever in that state office or local office. We can make sure the information gets to them so they know what the concern is, because they obviously need to address that. When I was in Maryland, I called up the directors of the other federal agencies in the state when I had things like that come up. Or we'd call the county offices. Just because I think they need to know, we need to help make sure they make things right. I mean, that obviously reflects on us as well. It would be okay if it's just them and it only reflects on them, but it reflects on all of us as sort of representing the government. How about none of your business? I think while you respect their feelings on that and while you respect their decision, I think you need to be prepared to talk about why you think it's important that they participate. Sort of like I've always told our NASDA enumerators, for them to do their job, and keep in mind they're contacting people on a weekly basis and they're running into these folks on a weekly basis. They've got to feel really good about what they do and they've really got to believe in it. And I think that's sort of at the heart of it. You've got to see the value in what you're doing so that you can convey that to the respondent, because if you don't see the value in it, then it's certainly going to be hard to get one of these people to cooperate or change their mind. And even the people that have been cooperating, if you're going out there and just doing things half-heartedly and this is my job and I need to do this lab analysis, they're not going to, pretty soon, they're not going to see the point either. So I think you've got to feel some excitement about it and really understand why it's important that you do that. Any other questions about interviewing techniques or handling refusals? Okay, thank you all very much.